Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And I must say, there's all of a sudden lots of changes coming to EVE Online. So it does look like CCP's balance team has gotten off to a really roaring start in the new year, because not only are some ships getting balanced, lots of stuff that lots of people find very positive and have been asking for a long time, but there's also changes coming to jump fatigue, to the entosis mechanic in order to conquer space in 0-0, and most of that, from what I've seen, is being received very positively. There's also a new FC ship coming, so that is something to look forward to on the market as well. And well, we'll take a look at the end to a couple of ships that are changing to see what the impact will have been on the market. But as always, we are going to start with some plex, and that's going to be at 1 minute. Like that, and let's take a look at this one. 3,135,000 ISK in Jita itself. Let's see, 3,130 in the player-owned trade hubs. That's actually 2 jumps out now, so the cheapest ones are in Sekenta cheap trades. 2 jumps out of Jita, very interesting. Basically the influence around the Jita trade hub is expanding, yet another jump. And if you look on the chart, of course, this is a pretty big dip, including today's average price. The reason for that is a sale from CCP. So that here again shows CCP's intervention. It's not the market crashing or anything like that. It's actually CCP doing an intervention, you could say, just by having a plex sale, which is pretty interesting. Of course, it at least changes things up a little bit. Still, it doesn't really show us anything directly, which is the analysis that I do like to make, is to compare the activity in the game and the announcements that CCP makes about changes to the game to the plex prices, to see how people are receiving these. And I would have actually maybe looked for a slight uptick on all of these awesome announcements. Maybe it'll happen in March with the March release, when most of those balance changes are planned to come out. So we will see. For now, it's maybe a little preemptive dip from CCP after they expect some increased prices from the changes that they're bringing, because that might bring back lots of older players, especially the jump fatigue change. I've read that is very popular, and that might actually bring back some old super pilots that and capital pilots that have basically gotten very frustrated with the mechanic that can penalize you a lot for basically using your ship. Next up, we've got the multiple pilot training certificates. That one is slightly on the uptick, going to 1.3 billion, which I would say is going to be the average price. It's going to keep moving around, but you can also see that the volatility is decreasing as plex prices have become very stable. Of course, it's normal that anything related to that is going to tend to stabilize as well. And so these are selling for 1.3 billion, a little bit above that. Buyers almost 1.3 billion as well, a little bit below that, 1,268,000,000 ISK. So here we can again see that stabilization, that effect that the very stable plex prices has been having. Let's see if it's also happening in the extractor and injector market. So here is the extractor market. That is strange, slight tick up here to 390 million on the chart. Still, they're being sold for 351 million and 367. I think that these orders here in the I Choose You perimeter trade up are basically purchases through the discounted plex prices, and so that the impact is going to be that we're actually going to dip down here. This median daily price already getting close to that, to the 350 million mark, and that is of course the impact of plex basically rippling through the economy at this point. Strange little tick up though on the skill extractors there. After that, the large scale injectors, which I personally find to be very interesting for investments, but I'm very hesitant to jump on that bandwagon when prices are stable but at a 1-year high point. So I would like to see a little bit of a dip back. Maybe this this sale is going to do that, because if plex, not plex, but the skill extractors basically drop down in price from around 360 million to 350 million, it should have a slight impact on the large scale injectors, which might create a small buy opportunity. If I would have to choose between buying on the dip for plex, skill extractors or large scale injectors, I would personally move on the large scale injectors, because who knows when lots of skill point demand shows up due to a CCP change. It's basically an extra potential layer of profit in my opinion. The small skill injectors are also, of course, very stable at the current trade range, around 160 million, 163 for the sellers, 159 for the buyers. That very narrow margin on these stable plex prices, clearly shown here in the small skill injectors. And now we have the daily alpha injector that is basically still finding its price a little bit on the chart, but it's still such a new item that it is probably more noise that we're seeing rather than actual rather than what's actually happening. If we would scale this up towards the plex scale, I think that we'd basically see something very similar to this final part right here. So the daily alpha injectors are selling for 60 million to 62 million in GTA itself, 57 million for the buyers. Again, very narrow margin on, at the moment, a very stable plex market, and that's, I think, very good in a sense, because I haven't seen too many complaint threads about plex prices and about price of injectors and all of that stuff. So maybe this little calm here, this area of calm in the last few months will actually be pretty good for showing some stability in the game, especially alpha characters that maybe want to earn their daily alpha injectors, maybe some small skill injectors, or work towards plex. You know, they can find a little bit of something to hold on to when they get used to these current prices. And of course, then with FanFest, with announcements, we could still go either way. Also towards the summer, it really all depends on what CCP is going to announce next year. But personally, I'm definitely okay with this stable period, albeit at, especially for plex and for the large scale injectors, at pretty high prices. But that's the name of the game in a virtual economy. I feel like inflation is basically inevitable. You can't allow a system where players can't accrue more currency. That is basically, that feels very unintuitive. If you would constantly put up big sinks that would keep pulling the players back down in order to control inflation and to maybe get to deflation, that's just never a choice I think that a game designer can afford to make. And as a result, we are continuously going to get more expensive stuff when it comes to the plex prices especially. Next up, let's move on to the minerals at 750. There we go. As always, we'll start with the smallest one. Here is titanium dipping down quite severely. I thought it was doing really well holding on to 5.5 ISK, but I guess the calm in nullsec and possibly the addition of moon mining in 0.5 systems and in wormhole space is only going to potentially increase supply, and as a result here, all of that combined is causing titanium to drop. Let's actually put the filter back up in GTA. 521 for the sellers, 495 for the buyers. So we're basically down from 5.5 ISK to 5 ISK when it comes to titanium. Let's hope that this doesn't have too much momentum. Once we get past 4.5 ISK, then we are of course getting into pretty dangerous territory. But this is basically the pattern that we've been seeing here. These high points, and here as well, are usually on some actual nullsec activity, on the Imperium going to war, big groups making big moves, and maybe we'll see more of that after the March release when supers will be used more. Maybe they'll, you know, spark some more conflict, so perhaps this dip could be a slight opportunity as well. Next up, we've got pyrite that is continuing its downward spiral to yet another 1-year low. That is not great. 471 for the sellers, 445 for the buyers. This should be more expensive than titanium, but it is not, which is a crazy situation that also doesn't bode well for titanium prices in my opinion. Let's see what Mexelon is doing. That's actually an important barometer, and here another pretty massive dip here, down to 74 ISK on the chart, 72 ISK now for the sellers, 68 for the buyers. This is definitely a pretty sharp drop from a high point of 83 ISK. It's still a decent price, but of course I also feel that maybe moon mining in 0.5 systems, maybe even wormhole space, I can see that potentially that like big nullsec groups might like splinter off a corporation and tell those guys, go live in a decent wormhole that has nullsec static, start building up some moon activities there, focus on some good Mixalon for us, and then whenever we get a good wormhole so that we have a connection, maybe a jump rate or something like that, we'll bring in our own Mixalon through your wormhole. We'll purchase that at a good price. It's another way that nullsec could become less dependent on highsec for Mixalon, which has always been their bottleneck, and as a result here we are definitely dropping down substantially in price. That is the danger I feel for Mixalon, that it could lose this status of something to mine for in highsec, because there will always be this demand in nullsec. The changes to moon mining might actually have altered that dynamic quite a little bit. For now though, this is a dip in line with what Tritanium is doing, in line with what Pyrite is yet again doing to its 1-year low. So Isogen is probably even more bad news, exactly going down towards 35 ISK, 37 for the sellers, 36, 37 for the buyers. We've never seen Isogen this cheap, and that of course puts things in perspective. When should you buy, right? People hear massive dumping. But over here that must have been a pretty big purchase when we broke 40 ISK. Turns out now that unless that person or those people sold at this higher point of 45 ISK, which is not a great margin, it's actually been a bad purchase because the price just crashed to an even lower point. That's not great news for us highsec miners. Luckily, of course, in 0.5 systems, we now potentially mine for nullsec minerals and for Tech 2 as well. Which has actually been a pretty nice ISK per hour when I was doing a little bit of mining on that when I extracted from my moon. Next up we've got Noxium, same pattern of course, going down towards 300 ISK, 316 for the sellers, 308 for the buyers. A little bit more to go until we break 300 and get to another 1-year low point, but it's definitely in play once again. And then the very interesting ones I feel are going to be nullsec minerals, and here is that dip towards a 1-year point again, 755 daily average today, 792 for the sellers, 711 for the buyers. Look at that margin open up, and I feel like this is definitely like the first casualty of the moon mining changes, the moon mining opening up to 0.5 systems, especially allowing us to create Zydrine and Megasite sources. You saw how popular the Arcanor was right off the bat, right? Megasite, from the safety, relative safety of highsec, while people jump on that opportunity, and as a result we are crushing the price of Zydrine as well to a 1-year low point. And next up here we've got Megasite, same pattern. Are we reaching 875? It's not yet on the sellers prices, but 880 for the buyers, 906 for the sellers, and if more and more sources come online, of course, it's going to put more and more pressure on these minerals, and it is going to muddy the waters a little bit between what's a highsec mineral, what's a nullsec mineral, because potentially there could actually be lots and lots of moons mined that are going to yield these minerals as well. So it is yet again actually a pretty big change to the mineral landscape in general, to mining, to the potential sources, resources for the individual minerals, and we'll have to see what the future brings here. For now it is pretty obvious that it means potentially a lot more supply, a lot more easy supply as well for many of these minerals, and thus lower prices are the result. Are cheap chips necessarily bad for the game? Well, no, this is another way to counter monetary inflation, of course, allow people to produce more stuff more quickly, more efficiently. And it's all a big balancing game, and this is the play that CCP is doing at the moment for minerals. And finally we also have Morphite that is holding on at 10,000 ISK. That's okay. I'm not sure if you can create Morphite in 0.5 systems. The few moons that I scanned, I found pretty cool one, very close to my structures very quickly, so I didn't bother scanning the whole of the tile, which I could still do maybe just to get the information, but more fight for now, holding on at 10,000 ISK for the sellers, 9,500 for the buyers. Definitely not playing with its 1-year lows, and we're not seeing this immediate impact from the opening up of new moons either here at this point. In my opinion, interesting week, not the best news of course for people that that are stuck mining just high-sec minerals at the moment. Next up, let's take a look at PI at 15 minutes. Like that. Let's go over these and let's see if we can see anything interesting for here. Broadcast nodes, I would say we're paying a bit of a premium. You see these increased volumes, that is probably due to the extra refineries that are being built at the moment in order to put them down on all the new moons that have opened up, but the spike has been decently limited in size here. Nothing too crazy. 2.3 million for the sellers, 2.15 million pretty much for the buyers, which is not a crazy price compared to what happened before the introduction of the refineries here. A little bit of a premium, but still, if you want to buy the necessary PI in order to construct your own M refinery, you can definitely still do so at these prices without feeling like you're overpaying by all that much. Which, just a side note on this, the BPC prices though, they have gone up quite substantially, and in fact the BPC price for the M refinery, so for the small one, is more expensive than the BPC price for the L refinery, which is again a pretty crazy situation, but that's just people finding the most efficient way to run all of their moon mining operations. And well, M's are the smaller investment, so of course people jump on that opportunity. It's also far more accessible, defensible. It makes you less of a target to go for an M. It's the exact reason why I chose to scale my potential project down from an L refinery with a market to an M refinery, so that I wouldn't get into trouble, and it's not something that I'm willing to lose just yet. Construction blocks next, a little bit of a dip after a little bit of an upswing to, I would say, slightly above average. So here now we are selling these for 11,900 ISK, 10,900 for the buyers. Both I would say sellers a touch below average, right? Put that at 12,000 ISK, buyers a little bit below average as well. Consumer electronics next, continuing its strong period here at the moment. 15,000 ISK on average, 15,800 for the sellers, 14,100 for the buyers. Still a very, very good price for consumer electronics. Definitely one of those that you know, if this is what you're doing, refined PI materials, you usually can create those on a single planet. This is where you might want to switch a couple coolant planets towards some consumer electronic planets, because it is twice the price basically that you're getting from that. And at the moment it really doesn't look like in 2 months this hasn't really moved. We're still paying that premium, and we know that coolants is still not doing all too well here. Because it is fuel related. So this one 8,500 for the first seller, 8,600 for the next one, 8,300 for the buyers. Very cheap, and I'm a little bit surprised at how slow this is actually starting to take place. I would well, maybe just because consumer electronics, you can't just say, all right, I'm going to convert my gas planets to something that makes consumer electronics. So there is a bit of inertia in there, which does create an opportunity if you're willing to do your homework on that, because both of these are potentially made on a single planet with the same infrastructure, and well, you get twice the price for the consumer electronics at the moment. At some point, if this lasts long enough, and here this is lasting for 2 months now already, and the coolants exactly the same thing here, it makes it worth it to do the switch, of course, if potentially you have the right planet in the system that you're doing PI in. Enriched uranium, that's not so bad. We dipped pretty damn low here as well to 8,700 ISK, but we're coming back a little bit, well above 10,000 ISK here. 11,600 for the sellers, 10,950 for the buyers. It's difficult to give an average when it comes to the fuel related PI, because we are in a completely new meta since the moon mining changes, but this feels like an okay price to me for enriched uranium, especially the sellers, right? Getting close to 12,000 ISK I feel is definitely pretty good for a fuel related PI material. Integrity Response rose next. It's the same pattern, of course, a slight premium to be paid because of all the refineries that are being produced at the moment. 2.7 million for the sellers, 2.6 for the buyers. It's definitely a little bit more expensive than the 2.5 we would normally pay, but again, nothing crazy, nothing completely out of line either. Mechanical parts continuing a slow descent towards 9,000 ISK. Hitting, I would say, close to a 1 year low again. 9,000 for the sellers, 8,700 for the buyers. Again, easy to produce on barren planets, but fuel related. So if you have that option, you might want to switch to something else. Nuclear reactors next. Yep, nice little ascent here towards 130,000 ISK, 124,000 for the sellers, 105,000 for the buyers, keeping a healthy margin there. So this is a great time if you manage to buy these for less than 100,000 ISK to try and unload them with a little bit of profit. And it shows that the nuclear reactors one remains a pretty interesting market if you're looking to actively trade in a PI material. Robotics next, holding at its 100,000 mark here pretty stably for about a month. That's not so bad in my opinion. 100,000 for the sellers, 96,000 for the buyers. Again, this is fuel related, and I would say from the historic perspective, this is on the average or slightly below average, but with the new situation when it comes to fuel demand, this might actually be a pretty good price to sell your robotics at. Self-harmonizing power cores next, another upswing to 2.5 million, of course, with the refineries coming in. 2.4 million for the sellers, 2.4 million for the buyers. You know what you're paying for, and well, it's like maybe 300,000 ISK premium or something like that you're paying at the moment, which again is not all that bad. Superconductors pretty stable below 12,000 ISK. I feel like this is definitely okay as well. 12,000 for the sellers, 11,000 for the buyers. Sellers around average, buyers slightly below average, but have the patience to put up a sell order, and I think it's not unreasonable to unload your superconductors. Test cultures next, a little bit of a dip here, that is not so good, but dipping down to 7,000 this was of course a nice little buy opportunity. That is over, but 8,000 for the sellers, 7,900 for the buyers is still very cheap if you look at the entire chart here. 8,000 for the sellers, below that for the buyers. I would say test cultures, we can see from this massive bubble, you could say, but it's not really a bubble. This is an increase in price related to the launch of the refinery, so you know that test cultures are needed to produce the advanced PI materials for the structures, and as a result this is potentially a good investment on an announcement or a release of yet another structure by CCP, and we know that there's still some of them in the works. And finally we've got wetware mainframes, again advanced PI material, the opening up premium here coming in at 2.5 million for the sellers, and pretty much 2.5, a little bit above that and a little bit below that for the buyers, and average price before that 2.2 million to 2.3 million. So again, a bit of a premium, but nothing too crazy. Next up, let's take a look at the Tech 1 market at 22.45. Okay, this one here, of course, considering the minerals at the moment, some of them were increasing in price a little bit. I feel like a lot of that is going to either be stopped or even have reversed by now, because, well, it's just across the board now that the minerals are going down. So here is the Apocalypse that did well to go to 140 million ISK, but yet stays pretty far away from its normal average. And here at the tail end you can see a little bit of a dip, a little bit of a drop off on the 5-day moving average, selling for now 136 million ISK and 124 for the buyers. I think we were at like 140, 142 last week. So here you can see, I think, fresh orders coming in on really cheap minerals, driving the price down a little bit potentially. The Caracal next, here the pattern is clearly showing a nice upswing on, well, a little bit after basically the minerals being a little bit higher, and now here it is already dropping back off to less than 9.5 million. 9.4 for the sellers, 8.8 for the buyers. Cheap minerals, cheap Tech 1 ships, and well, with the rebalancing of even more Tech 2 ships, faction battleships, things like that, I don't think it's the time that Tech 1s are gonna come back in the meta. Maybe battleships got a little bit of a buff across the board, but will that make battleships part of the Nosec meta? I feel like they'll just stick with faction stuff, despite the nerf to the most popular one. Here's the Catalyst, same pattern. This time it's a little bit unstoppable, going down to 1.17 million. Buyers are at 1 million. This is definitely coming back in line with average prices. The Drake next, ooh, that one is continuing to take off. Might be a little bit of an offshoot from the Drake Navy issue buff, something like that might be happening. Up to 50 million, not bad. 54 million for the sellers, 44 million for the buyers. So here a Drake blueprint might be okay. I think if you make if you look at the basket of minerals needed at current prices, compare that to 50 million for a Drake, I think you'll have a pretty nice margin. Ferox next, I think that one got nerfed a little bit because it was dominating the meta a little bit too much, and so as a result down to 45 million ISK, 45 million for the sellers, 41 for the buyers. Nice little upswing, nice little dip here at the tail end. Next up we've got the Hurricane. Here we see that same pattern, right? You've got very low point in December. We're going up in price a little bit on some conflict, on some slightly higher mineral price to above 45 million, but at the tail end here, nope, it's not continuing. 44.9 for the sellers, 40 million for the buyers. Megatron managed here, perfect example. Last week we saw, well, you know, the Megatron pretty well. After this is the arms race event that like put up lots of free battleships on the market all of a sudden. We were going back, Megatron doing really well to recover to 150 million ISK pretty much. On higher mineral price as well, was pushed up a little bit, but here at the tail end, right, Moon mining coming up, mineral price going back down, and that price is going back below 150 million. 155 for the sellers, but 139 for the buyers. That margin opening up, and this low mineral price are just going to continue to put pressure on this, in my opinion. The Oracle next, same thing a little bit, although this increase in price here I think was due to a drought in supply, and that is obviously being plugged now, and 75 million for the sellers, bring the price back down a little bit. The Raven, same thing as the Megatron, did really well to crawl from 130 million back to 150, 160 even 170 at the high point here, for a battleship that's out of the meta and that really had to go through a lot of supply. This was a really good job, and this showed that the mineral prices tend to have the biggest impact on the battleships, on the bigger ships, but here at the tail end we can already see the opposite. 5-day moving average crossing 20-day moving average, a little bit of a downturn, and so this is in my opinion the stop and the hesitation of this ascent here due to the mineral market. Retriever next, same thing, but with a little bit more violence, dropping to 22.8 million, 20 million for the buyers. The Tempest next, same thing here again, went up to 150 at the tail end here, is dropping, and first seller coming in at 148 is going to continue to put pressure on the price. The Thrashers, stable at 1.1 million, 491 of them, that's quite a bit of supply, but for now it really looks like those destroyers are pretty stable. Tornado next, I thought that one got a little bit of a buff as well. Yeah, potentially giving the Tornado the ability to use the micro jump unit. Same thing here, so that's strange. I think this was before the announcement, this increase in price. Tornado before the announcement as well, massive increase in price. CSM leaks guys, potentially it's something like that, but I must, yeah, it was a drought I think as well in the Tornado and the Oracle. Might have to go and take a look back here. It doesn't take much to create a drought in these Tech 1 markets at the moment, but it's a little bit strange that we've got this premium, this increase in price to slightly above average on the Tornado as well, before the dev blog with the changes to the attack battle cruisers, where they'll be able to use micro jump drives. Next up we've got the Tristan, 500,000 ISK, still doing okay, but again under pressure at the tail end. There's really not much to say here for the Venture, still on average. And then here the Vexor tried to go to 11 million, now dipping back to 10 million ISK, 10 million for the sellers, 9.5 for the buyers. The take one market is going to be in for a pretty rough time, I think, if the mineral market continues the way it does. Next up, the Tech 2 market at 29.20. Let's take a look at that one and see if maybe the development of new moons and potentially more supply of Tech 2 materials will change this up a little bit. Well, here the Aries, you know, looking to stay below 30 million ISK and doing a slight nudge down yet again. Let's take a look at the prices. 29 for the sellers, 27 for the buyers. I mean, it's maybe buyers towards 25, something like that would be my goal, my lookout for, where I would say, you know what, this feels like it might be in line with the new moon mining potential or something like that. And well, it's a slight step down, but it shows that price above 30 million might actually be on the expensive side. Next up, let's take a look at the Cerberus chart. That one actually going back up. So cruisers, of course, there's, as you can see, a lot less of these. 278 million ISK for the sellers, 236 for the buyers. Let's just hope that it doesn't boost back up to 280 million. As long as that doesn't happen, I feel like we could still be in for the steps down. But on the cruiser market, it's of course going to be trickier to stabilize all of that. The claw next though, that one dipping back below 30 million ISK here. Try to go back up, but staying below it. Very good, with 221 coming in at 29.6 million. That's the quantity that I was talking about here. That should help stabilize this market and potentially bring us that nudge down. 26 million for the buyers as well. I would look for 25 million, maybe even a little bit less for the claw if we look at the previous range here, but potentially again we are working towards that step down again. The Crow also wanting to go below 30 million ISK, sellers coming in at 30.5 million, buyers at 27.5. Crusader next, staying below 30 million as well. 27.5 on the chart, 28 for the sellers, 25.2 for the buyers. A little bit of a lack of demand, 25 million comes into play. Crusader is almost interesting, except that I would give it a couple more weeks to see when more and more 0.5 and wormhole moons start production. Those ores still need to find their ways to the market as well, I think. So potentially we could go even lower, I think. I'd be careful with jumping on an opportunity like this, but it shows the potential of a little bit of a lack of demand, not too many buyers coming in on a single frigate. Well, look at that price go down towards 25 million, which is not so bad considering the rest of the market. The Heretic next, finally a destroyer and interdictor going down a little bit more towards 70 million a year, 72 for the sellers, 64 for the buyers. The Hound, let's see here, went back above 30 million, but here again another step down. 29.9 for the sellers, 27 for the buyers, still some work to be done there. Ishtar next, also hesitating, but staying around 250, 250 for the sellers, first few coming in below that point, 238 for the buyers. We've got Manticore next. Manticore has always been a bit more expensive, so I would give it say that it's good news that it is staying just above 30 million. 30 million for the first seller, in fact, that's interesting to me, and then 29 million for the buyers. The Nemesis, after bouncing to 25 million, which, you know, 24.2 even, bouncing back up, but staying shy of 30 million by a decent amount, 28.7 for the sellers, 23.8 for the buyers. I would say the Nemesis might be the first one where we are starting to really see the steps down here. Peaks up to 40 million, stepping down to 30 million, back up to 35, back down to 25, back up towards 30. I think if the chart draws itself, it'll probably be able to do that, but look out. I feel like in the upcoming weeks and potentially months, but I would say mostly the next month would be crucial. More supplies coming in. What's the next step down? The Nemesis feels like an important one to keep an eye out for potentially the pattern showing up then in less popular ships, because we are talking about massive availability, decent demand, a very popular stealth bombers, often flown in bigger ships, so you'd need that smallest ship. It's a frigate, so it costs the least amount of minerals, but very popular, often lost in big chunks as well, but also often bought in big chunks as well. And as a result here, I feel like this could be one of the forerunners in what's the rest of the Tech 2 market going to do in relation to the production cycle that is behind it that has caused this increase in price. Pontifex slowly edging down towards 75 million ISK, 81 still for the sellers, 72 for the buyers. Next up we've got a purifier, stable at 30 million, at least here, peaks 45 million, 40 million, not another peak back, so I would still say that's good news. 30.4 million for the sellers, 27 for the buyers. Next up here we've got the Raptor, also dipping its way back to 30 million. 33 for the sellers, 28 for the buyers. Bit of a margin opening up there. Then we've got the Saber staying at 80 million, of course. Well, it's an interdictor, it's not an interceptor or a frigate, so it takes a bit more to stabilize that market. But the stiletto, look at that, I like this pattern. Staying on 30 million for a while, and now at the tail end here, dropping to 28 on average. 28.7 for the sellers. Decent availability again. 27 million for the buyers. I feel like there's room to go a little bit lower. Stork next, finally, that one after yet another 1 year high point is going down a little bit. 84 for the sellers, 78 for the buyers. Pretty crazy how these command destroyers are selling really well, and that's of course when ISK is not flowing to minerals or the Tech 1 markets and we get stable plex prices. Well, it needs to go somewhere, and part of this is probably also inflation that is finding its way to the Tech 2 market at the moment. I mean, there's reasons why these are more expensive, of course, not just inflation, but I feel like at the moment, you know, all the extra ISK is basically finding its way to the Tech 2 markets, and that's why we're able to sustain on some of these crazy on some of these command destroyers. We can maintain some of these, in my opinion, pretty crazy prices. And then finally we've got the Taranis as well, and that one is staying below 30 million too. A little bit of a dip above that, but look at the lack of demand. 25.9 million, you know, just 28 of them, and then we're at 23 million. So it's coming into play here again. 28.5 for the first seller, and the more sellers come in here, that's going to be potentially another leg down on more base minerals coming towards the markets, I think. Next up, we've got the Tech 3 market that is at 36.40. There we go, and it's 40. Let's go. As always, we'll start with the destroyers, and here is the Confessor. I would say bad news for people that were looking to trade on these. 44 million for the sellers, 42 million for the buyers. Decent supply coming in here, and it looks so good, so promising. 40 million up to 60, down to 40, up to 60, down to 40, up to 60. That was so good. I really regret not having bought on some of these dips because they were so obvious. They were great opportunities, but after that we can see that obviously the peaks were going lower and lower, and we're constantly bouncing off that 40 mark where more supply came in closer and closer to that price point, and now unfortunately the Confessor has basically stabilized to a 40 to 45 million price band, and unless nullsec explodes again or something like that, it's looking like it might be here to stay. It could still be good to try and purchase at the right time, but then I would say you'd want that certainty, so you'd want the buyers to be well below 40 million before you do that. Hecate next, also here going below 50 million, 47.5 million. At 48 million we got another 300 coming in here. 43.2 for the buyer. This one is basically moving in a 43 to 48 million price band, and the availability is definitely decent. We also have good demand, but nothing too crazy. Slightly oversupplied. I think that this might get under pressure a little bit more, and as a result here this is stabilizing quite a bit, and we would need nullsec to do something about that. If you're looking to make an investment, I would look for a pretty serious premium on the buyer side of things. The Jackdaw also slowly going down, back below 50 million. 47 for the sellers, 40 million for the buyers. So again, it's only like 50 ships, I would say, and then you are at 37 million. If we ever see that pattern show up here, then I would say, yeah, try to pick up some cheap Jackdaws for the future. It is actively being flown a lot by the Imperium. If they ever deploy, you're gonna get a good price on that. But 40 million feels like it could potentially still be a gamble on a longer period of peace. in nullsec, we could actually get to a lower point pretty easily. And then finally we also have the Svepel, same thing here, managed to get up to 50 million, but it's basically moved. It was moving between 40 to 50 million price band, currently 45 million. Look at the supply here, that's 400 chips pretty much at 45 million. It's not gonna budge anymore. 42 for the buyer, so Svepel is now moving in a 42 to 45 million price band, and that's still a little bit of work here on the buyers to go below 40 million. So we'll either need patience or something in nullsec to happen, I think, for the stability to leave the destroyer market. It's unfortunate because this confessor period here was so great. If you were looking to do some trading, I was really starting to consider maybe we should look at the Tech 3 market for active trading with my hesitation on the Tech 2 market, but that's unfortunately gone as well, I fear. Next up here we got the Legion, also stable for about a month here, not much to say, with 240 of them at 145. It's really not gonna budge all too quickly. 135 million for the buyers. Again, that margin narrowing, prices stabilizing. Loki next, that one is still doing some crazy stuff, but it's constantly so expensive. 255 at 212 million should stabilize things a little bit in a 200 to 215 margin, but 200 million for the buyers as well. I feel like with a chart like this, you're always a little bit afraid with producers finally going all out on the Loki and then crashing that price down to something that's more in line with the other cruisers. Here is the Proteus, extremely stable, 140 for the sellers, 130 for the buyers. And then finally we have the Tengu that did notice pretty nice increase in price all of a sudden on lack of supply, but look at the volumes as well. So the Tengu is just not actively being traded all that much, 100 to 200 ships a day, that's it. And with 415 at 160 here, gonna stabilize things again. We're already back down to 157 for the sellers, 145 for the buyers. I feel like it's not going to take too much effort for the producers to stabilize the Tengu as well. And that's really an outlier that came out of nowhere, this increase in price here. I think it was the event, I would say. The Tengu, great ship to run the Guardians Gala sites in. So yeah, the Tech 3 markets, unfortunately, I'm seeing lots of signs that this is stabilizing. And I would say at this point, I'm looking for buy opportunities, and then we're keeping one eye on nullsec to see if something happens there that might create a sell opportunity. And then finally, for the extra product, I am choosing a couple of ships that have been mentioned in the dev blog that I think got some buffs. So at 42 minutes, let's start with the Munin. I'm going over the dev blog next week, I think, but the Munin gets a massive buff, and I think it was like a mid-slot that really made people very happy. And look at that, this is CCP's impact on the market. Stable between 150 and 200 million, around 200 million in the last few months, and it's now selling for 326 million ISK, 295 for the buyers. They have been forced up as well, and it's very, very unfortunate because I just received a very interesting fit for a Munin for exploration in Sash space. Also one of those ships that's been redesigned. So if I make this a little bit bigger, looks absolutely amazing. I want one. I think I'm going to at some point pull the trigger on the 300 million ISK Munin, but that just looks so great. Let's maybe take a look at some of these. It's got a lot of skins as well. That's really, oh man, this actually, I like it. The more plain color, that's okay, you know, decently toned down. And then with the red here, that's definitely, I don't really like too many of these. None of them really pop out except here, Firewall, that's really cool as well. And Glacial Drifts, that's okay, nothing too crazy. But yeah, Justice, you know, just plain, very clean. Ah man, I'm not sure what to do here, but the reason I'm of course showing this is because of this increase in price. You never know, especially now with a balanced team in play. With what I've seen here, lots of these changes are requested by the community, and it's mostly CCP doing, I think, changes that always feel very easy to the community, but might not be so easy to actually pull off here. But decently small to medium in scope, that might be, you know, something that they'll continuously look at every couple months or something like that, and then potentially that could mean lots of volatility in the market. And if you can go from 200 million ISK to 325 million on a purchase, of course, that's very nice. It shows also, I would say, the power of diversification. If you had a couple of Munins lying around, if I had looked into these for exploration a little bit earlier, I might actually have a great opportunity to sell a couple of these at a nice premium. So that's the first one. I thought the Eagle next, yeah, look at that, same pattern of course, was costing 230 to 250 million ISK. Currently there's just no Eagles here, they're costing 316 million. They're also, I think, used, or they were used quite actively, and the reason here, if I'm not mistaken, is that, let's see, they get more drones. So what's the fitting like? It's got, well, it's not a missile platform. It's got 5 hard points for turrets, and then attributes, drone capacity. It goes from no drones to medium drones, I think, or is it small drones? Either way, this does make the Eagle potentially another really interesting exploration cruiser, in my opinion, because it's going to combine, well, something different, of course, probably railguns, but with potentially those drones that can that I feel, you know, a nice combo with effective turret weapons with some drone backup is perfect in a cruiser for exploration. So looking forward to that as well. Again, just look at the CCP intervention here. If you had a couple lying around for around 200 million, you know, you could have put those on the market now for 310, made 100 million on each of those. Not bad at all. And then I think the final one that I want to check is the Drake Navy issue. Wasn't that changed to like a tanking bonus to, yeah, like this one? Oh, alright, nothing too crazy on this one. So I thought that it went from a tanking bonus to a damage bonus, making this one just basically a nice damage platform. 260 for the sellers, 235 for the buyers. It doesn't always work, so you do have increased volumes, you get an increase in price, but nothing all too crazy on the Drake Navy issue buff, I would say. So very, very interesting. I want my Munin, not sure when I'm gonna pull the trigger, but I think I'll just, you know, pony up the extra money at this point, because I've been waiting since basically I got that fit. If I go back, I received that fit the day before the dev blog, and I was like, I'll swing by Jita tomorrow, then I'll buy myself the Munin, and then there it was, 320 or 350 million or something crazy like that, and I was like, oh god, no, I should have gone in to buy it yesterday. And now I said, you know, I'm gonna wait a little bit, I'm gonna wait until maybe the prices drop a little bit, but it's staying extremely expensive here at the moment. And I do want one to see what we can do with it for exploration. Anyways, that's it for this Eve Talk then, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys next time.